All right, hello everyone. Yeah, but am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Okay, great. You should be able, you should be able to hear me. If you can hear me, please, and you're on the line, please just drop a note in the chat. Just drop a comment in there. I'd love to hear if you can hear me. Every now and again, I have trouble with that, so I would like to know if you can hear me. Also, I'd love to know from you what your questions are about planning, what challenges you run across with planning, and why you're here. What are you interested in to know? I would just love to hear it. Drop it in the chat. And if you can help me out here, if you put a comment or a like in the chat or anything like that, it then spread this and more people will join in, and that's really helpful for me. So today we're going to go into we're going to talk about OKRs, and we're specifically talking about the planning part of OKRs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce OKRs generally. I'm going to talk about how planning fits into an OKR program, and not necessarily because OKRs are the only way of doing planning, because they're not. There's plenty of ways of doing planning that don't involve OKRs, and what I talk about will apply to situations where you're not using OKRs. So don't fear that. But I wanted to just talk about how I think about OKRs and how I think about the overall management system, and then where planning fits into that, and that will help you give you context. Now you can take everything I'm talking about here and adapt it to adapt it to whatever situation you're doing in your organization. So we're going to talk, as part of this, we're going to talk about how to make planning work in a Scaleup context. We're talking about that, how to make it so it's not so process heavy, and how to make sure you do actually plan, how to join people together and to coordinate, and how to deal with dependency problems or too many priorities, as well as how to handle business as usual. So stay tuned for all of that. There's lots of things going on here. As I say, if you can hear audio, drop the like in the comment. If you've got a question, please drop it in the comments, and I will try and address that question as we go. So let's just jump straight into this. I'm going to start off with briefly what are OKRs. Now, if you came to my previous presentation last week, my previous webinar, this is some of the same content, but it's a bit briefer because I want to just make sure we have some context to put this in place. So basically, OKRs are when you have a consistent time constraint, you have what we will achieve and the definition of success. And what we will achieve is the objective, definition of success is key results. All we're doing here is we're basically saying, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we know we're going to succeed. And we have a time constraint just to say that in, right? So if you have another goal setting system, you can use all these the same kinds of approach to this. You don't have to formally use OKRs to use this methodology, right? Here's the example of this, right? Basically in Q4, we will scale up our sales machine as measured by increase the average monthly webinar attendance from 10 to 100, increase initial meetings with qualified leads per month from 2 to 5, increase conversion rate of qualified leads to sale from 15 to 30%, and sign our first no-touch trial customer. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, first of all, I'm saying the period of time, and this Q4 is like something that's consistent across the organization. I'm saying what we're going to achieve, which is not the world's most specific, but it's clear what this means. Like, this is not unambiguous. It's quite ambiguous what we mean by that, but people understand the direction of this. They understand what that means, and that's hopefully motivating, and they understand how it fits into the strategy. And then as measured by is the specifics that makes it really clear to your organization. You then put this into a format. So in Q4, we will scale up our sales machine as measured by those key results. And this format is the OKR format. And so I use this little diagram, this little sets of blocks to represent an OKR wherever I use them. But basically the idea here is that you put it into this form, and that's what an OKR is. It's nothing special. There are some rules. People often add rules to these things and make them overly complicated, but that's all it is. Right. So we've talked about we will scale up our sales machine as measured by these objectives. We can put these together into a set of OKRs like this. So the Q4 OKRs for maybe the company, 1, 2, 3, and we have key results 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now, clearly, best not to have too many of them. If you have lots, the more OKRs you have, the less focus you have. So have as few as you can, and have a good 2 or 3, maybe up to 5 key results, but no more than 3 objectives, right? So that's the basic idea of what a set of OKRs are. The OKR cycle then is when you start with your OKRs, you do work usually about 3 months, usually it's a quarter, and then you finish, and that's an OKR cycle. So all we're doing here is we're taking some ambiguous work, we're saying what we're going to achieve, how we define success, how long we're going to take, and then we can go through that and get to the end and say we did them. Now, one thing I want you to remember when you're thinking about OKRs is that OKRs are just one management tool. You have OKRs, you have incentives, you have data, you have all these other tools. There are many, many tools that you have available to you. OKRs are just one tool, and you need to use the right tool for the job, for the particular thing you're trying to achieve. Don't try and put everything as an OKR because it doesn't work, right? You can make it work, but it's pretty awkward. So here's how to think about this. Your business is a machine, and your business is a machine that at the top there, you can see at the very top, use my finger to point at things that doesn't work that well if I do that. Okay, so at the very top there, you have customers coming in through the marketing funnel and the sales pipeline. They go through into that, they go through into a machine, and the machine is your operations, your delivery, your product, your service, whatever it is you're doing. You do something to these customers and they come out more satisfied, happier, pleased, and you generate profit. And that's what your business is, right? And if you abstract over any business, it's basically made up of blocks like this. Some of them have 2 funnels. Some of them have a partnerships funnel as well, which is a bit different. Some have a very complex delivery process. Some have a very complex marketing process and simple delivery, right? But that's basically what a machine is, right? What this business is. And what I want you to think about, I've got my arrows are not coming where I thought they'd come. Okay, cool. My animations didn't work. But basically the idea here is that when you're running this machine, most of the running of the machine, like keeping this machine running, generating that profit, can be done with data and incentives and a bit of feedback and financial statements and things like that. Because what you're doing is you're running processes. Okay. Now, what you also need to do in a business is build or change the machine. Right? So you use OKRs to build and change this machine. When we're adding a functionality to this, when we're changing the process to make it more efficient, when we're changing the process to make it so it adds more value to the customer, when we're adding another funnel, when we're adding a new target markets, we're doing things that change this machine. And by the way, don't get confused. If you're a person working in the business, you're not a cog in the machine, you're operating the machine, you're running the machine. This is nothing Tayloristic about this, if you know Taylorism. But that's the idea with this is that your OKRs are about building and changing, and they're building and changing the processes. That's what you're doing. You're using this to drive attention onto building and changing the processes. Now, you also need to design the machine, and you basically have discovery and strategy tools. Oh, my animations are not working the way I intended to. We have discovery and strategy tools, and I've got the scientists discovering new ideas and so on, hypotheses, and then strategy, forming a strategy, and that's basically design. You're designing the processes. Right, so these are the different things you do. You wouldn't generally use OKRs for this because it doesn't really make sense. You have to use a different set of processes. So my animations are really strange here. I'm terribly sorry. Right, okay. And in fact, I've got oh goodness me. Clearly something went wrong with my slides and I've got the word data there unexpectedly. So basically what you're doing is you have a machine that generates profit, makes happy customers, generates profit. You're running the machine. That's the point of the business. And you run that with mostly metrics and incentives and feedback and things like that. You're building and changing the machine, which you run with OKRs, and you're designing the machine, which you run with strategy and discovery processes. Now, one of the things, so that's how this all fits together into things, and that's where OKRs fit. And so when you think about the design you're doing, you design something, you have a plan for implementing it, that then becomes the OKRs that you're going to implement to make changes to your machine this quarter, right? That's what you're trying to do. One of the things that you may notice is that OKRs themselves don't do anything, but what they're doing is setting the goal. We've set the goal, now what? And that's where we really need to introduce the OKR operating system, and here's where planning will come in part into this. I want to set the planning context here. Now, in any business, you're going to be doing as a manager, as a leader in any business, whether you're a people manager or a CEO or a product manager, say, you're going to be involved in and running these processes. If you're a CEO, you're making them happen as a system and you're implementing them as a system. As a manager, you're operating them. As a product manager, you're usually interacting with them, right? But number 1 is the planning habit. We're going to go through these briefly. Number 2 is the operational link. Number 3 is the execution cadence. Number 4 is the strategic link, and 5 is accountability. And these are sort of systems that you need to have in place. And frankly, every business has some level of these systems in place to run their business. But it's really helpful to think about these in a structured way. And if you think about this a bit more, operational link is really about understanding how the work that I'm doing, my OKRs, this building the business, how it relates to running the business. Execution cadence is making sure that I'm actually doing the things to do the building. And strategic link is really about understanding how well what I'm doing is representing my design and how it informs my design, right? So think about that for a little bit there. Accountability is really about people. And planning is about turning the OKRs into action, right? So let's talk about the planning habit briefly. So this is basically, what I'm going to do here is I've got 5 slides to go through each of these in just a little overview, and then we're going to go into detail, and we're going to put it all together, and then we're going to go into detail in the planning habit. The planning habit here is all about having an objective and objective and key results and an owner. We allocate this owner to say this person owns this objective or this key results, and that doesn't mean that they are magical. They've got a crown on there. It's kind of the crown is like you are now responsible for making sure this happens. You're not necessarily the person that does all the work, and you're not the person who gets the credit for everything necessarily. But you have to write a plan of this, and what I recommend is a 1-page plan. Write a short plan, and then review and repeatedly revise this plan. And that process of review and revise is what I call the planning habit. And what I'm saying here is that if you write a short enough plan and you review and revise regularly this plan, however your goals are set, however you're trying to achieve things, but if you do a short plan and you review and revise it regularly, you will get a whole lot of benefits that you wouldn't get otherwise. And the trick here is that a lot of people tend to see a plan as a blueprint, and so they write this massive 20-page plan, or they see planning as unnecessary because, hey, we're agile, and all that sort of stuff. And agile is great. I'm a big fan of agile, but to do agile well, you kind of do need to plan. So we'll talk about that in more detail. But this is the planning habit. Your operational link is basically a weekly business review. You go through the data and feedback from your business. You have a meaningful conversation about it. You decide some actions, and you get some shared insights, right? And what you're doing here is you're checking on how the business is running on a regular basis so that you can generate new actions and make sure you're keeping running the business, because that's always going to be important. Even if you have OKRs, running the business is still important. In fact, it's usually more important. And you're getting shared insights because the shared insights will inform your next OKRs and inform your planning habit. And in fact, your actions will inform these as well. But that shared insight of understanding how this is really working and making sure that we as a team really understand, shared understanding of how this works, will help you inform your next OKRs, obviously your strategy as well, and your planning habit. Your execution cadence. I'm going to try and skip all my animations because they suck. Your execution cadence basically is made up of 3 things. You first of all just take every week, you're beating the drum, you're making sure that things are happening every week. And this is really about making sure that, number 1, we're looking at our regular business, our operations, and number 2, we're making progress on the OKRs that we said and updating our plans. So what you do with this is you have an asynchronous update. Don't whatever you do in your weekly meeting, don't go around the meeting and say, so tell me your updates this week, and tell me your updates this week, tell me your updates this week, and all that sort of stuff. Because everyone tunes out. It's boring as anything. It's low value. No one's brain's engaged, right? Get everyone to write a brief update, send it by email, Slack, whatever tool you use, send it in advance, asynchronously, have everyone read them at the start of the meeting. Now, in my longer trainings, I do go into how to run a kick-ass weekly meeting, but the basic idea is this. You start off with the asynchronous updates so that you can read them and everyone can just sort of absorb them and understand what's going on. We review our operational data. We do that operational link that I just talked about, looking at the data and the feedback, making some actions, getting shared insights, and then we review our plans. So we're looking at the plans that we made, the planning habit. This is where the planning habit comes into action. You're reviewing the plan on a regular basis based on our new shared insights from the updates that happened last week and reviewing our operations, right? And what you're doing here is you're using the OKR as a North Star. You're not using the OKR as an agenda item. We're not going through OKRs as number 1, 2, 3. Let's talk about them. Because as soon as you do that, you start making new plans. And that's not what you want. You have a plan. What you want to do is change your plan, right? Use that as a basis for change so that you can be agile, so that you can respond to change. The asynchronous updates and the operational link are the information that informs you how things are changing so you can update your plans. And of course, from there, you're triggering off more actions, right? So some of those actions will be in the plans, some of them are from the operational link. Now, halfway through the quarter, you're in the whirlwind, you're doing all this stuff, getting your OKRs done and operating the business. Halfway through the quarter, just take a pause, step out of the whirlwind and go climb the ladder, have a longer look and say, use the crystal ball, look in the crystal ball and say, where are we going to get to? Given that what we know now, we're halfway through the quarter, we've been doing this for a while, we've been updating our plans, where are we going to get to, right? And you should have a reasonable understanding of where that's going to be. Then go a bit higher, up to flight level. And you want to say, are we doing things right? Like, given what we're doing, are we doing the right things here? And what you're doing here is you're reassessing not just the details of the plans, but have we allocated the right resources? Are we using the right priorities? Should we stop anything major that we haven't really thought of stopping that we should stop, right? For that matter, should we start something? But normally it's more about stopping things to make sure you're going to get the things done that really matter. So you're doing a little bit of reprioritization here. Maybe you're even in a situation where you look at your current OKRs and say, we need to drop this key result or that objective because then we can succeed in the ones that really matter, given what we know halfway through the quarter. Are we doing things right? Then you go one level above to the satellite view and you look down at your strategy and your OKRs and say, are we doing the right things? Are these the right things to be doing now? Now, ideally, you're not going to go and revise everything in the middle of the quarter, because that would be silly, unless you have to, like if there's a pandemic or a crisis. But what you're doing here is you're trying to understand, well, next quarter, what do we need to do differently? Or do we need to change our plan? And usually this is really about halfway through the quarter, making sure that, okay, to make the decisions we need to make at the end of next quarter, what do we need to do? What actions do we need to take to make sure we can make them? The fifth one, the last one is accountability. So you have this at the end of the quarter, you show the OKRs, you show the data of the operations, how it's working, and you do transparent, open reporting in front of people. Now, what we don't need to do then is beat people up for missing targets, because they're presenting that in front of their peers, in front of their reports, in front of the whole company, perhaps, and there's enough transparency and accountability there that's going to provide its own sense of accountability. Is relatively easy. What you do need to do at this stage is not overdo the looking backwards. You need to look backwards and take the wins, take the learnings, and then focus on the forwards. But having this moment where you do say, so we said we're going to do this, we did this one, we didn't do that one, and we kind of half succeeded in that one. I recommend just having traffic lights. It's easier. This is a really great way of just providing that accountability and making sure things actually happen. So people know they're going to have to get up in front of the company and explain what's going on. And that's a really powerful tool. So putting all this together, we have a quarter, we have an OKR or a series of OKRs, we start the quarter, we have the end of the quarter or the period, whatever you're using. We kick off by writing a one-page plan, right? And doing our planning habit, revising and reviewing that plan with our colleagues to make sure that we're aligned. Now, through the quarter, we run our execution cadence every week, right? That cadence involves having the asynchronous update, having the operational link, and doing the planning habit again, like revising that plan. So that's like your weekly meeting, right? And you keep doing this every week. Now, this is, just for simplicity's sake, it's only got 4 quarters. Halfway through, you do an operational, you do a strategic link. You make sure your strategy is still right, and you inform your next set of OKRs. And then at the end of the quarter, you do your accountability, and you make sure, did we actually do this? Now, there is obviously something very important about how you go forwards from there as well. But this is just looking at one quarter as a self-contained unit. You can also run this and have a look at this back and go, well, let's do a retrospective and modify what we need to modify. This is something we need to change about how we're doing this, and that's a really helpful tool. So let's dig into the planning habit. We're going to go into this in a bit of detail. If you have questions on this, please do drop it in the comments. I'm very happy to hear from you. If you have a question or if you have a situation that you come across that you're keen to learn about, happy to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. In the meantime, I also just want to tell you a brief word from our sponsor. And our sponsor today is me, because I run a business. And my business is, I do this kind of thing for scale-ups. I usually work with seed to Series D. I usually work with the executive teams, but I'm happy to work with any level of management, including in non-scale-ups. But I mean, scale-ups are my sort of speciality. We can take this, we can do a retrospective, we can do an execution audit and see how this is working and what needs to change. We can do a full rollout of the whole program and train your team and help them adopt it and all that. We can do something custom. If you're interested in this, even if you're not the CEO, if you're the chief of staff or something like that, drop me a call, meet.talktorichard.com. Please just feel free to reach out. We can have a chat about it. We can figure out how this might fit into your organization. And I also do this for individuals, from product manager to executive. I'm planning to set up cohort courses and some training and peer coaching and a community. So the idea of this is that I think a lot of leaders, especially in scale-ups, don't get exposure to a wide enough variety of other leaders. So if we can capture people into a community and then they can do peer coaching within that community, combined with some expert training, and I can do a cohort course to kick off your quarter, this I think is going to be super high value for leaders in small organizations. So please feel free to reach out and contact me on LinkedIn. Now, if you have a comment, Duncan says, enjoying being a viewer. Hi, Duncan, how you doing? Great to see you from Australia, logging in from Canberra. Anyway, hi, Duncan. Cool. Anyone else who, if you have a comment or question, please drop it in the comments on whatever platform you're on. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the planning habit in detail. Here's the plan. You have some objectives and key results. You have an owner for either the objective or a set of objectives or a set of key results or a key result or whatever that owner happens to own, right? This does not need to be lined up from a function to a set of key results. We'll talk about that in another session, but whatever they own, this is what you're doing, writing a plan for the thing that they own. And of course, just to be clear, the thing that they own might not be something that they have all of the resources to get done. It may depend cross-function in a whole bunch of other teams, but usually you'd have the owner being a person who's pretty critical and central, either to getting it done or to owning the result, so to benefit, to being this sort of like fundamentally responsible for the result. Sometimes there's quite a lot of work that has to happen in another team. They're writing a plan, the one-page plan. We're going to talk about what the one-page plan has. Then they review that plan and revise that plan. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as well. So in the one-page plan, what I recommend you do, and this is a tool that I found super useful for people. And as I said earlier on, if you have a plan and it turns into 20 pages and it's a blueprint for what you're doing, it's actually a mega failure of a plan. I'm sorry to say, because you've put a huge amount of work into it and it's something you love, but that's the problem. And no one else who's reviewing this can really give you useful feedback because it's too complicated and you've got so much effort into it that you'll naturally be in love with it and you'll naturally resist it. So what I recommend you do is keep your plan as short as you can, 1 page, 2 or 3 at maximum if you need to, right? Keep them brief. Write down the OKRs that you're trying to achieve. Write down the initiatives that you think you're going to need to achieve them. And then write down the resources that go along with those initiatives. And there's lots of different ways of writing these down, but that's the fundamental core of what you need to do. We will talk about dependencies in just a moment. But optionally, on top of that, you might add things like here are metrics that we can use to track how we're going. Here are milestones, again, that we use to track how we're going, that we know. Here are some risks that we have, that we are aware of, that we want to track. Here are some things that we're not going to do, the non-plan items. Now, this is a super cool tool because having non-plan items in your plan helps anyone who's reading this realize what you're not going to do. And that can be a very critical part for collaboration. So which again, we'll talk about that in the dependencies. And then you might have a whole lot of run work. Like we have this plan. You have 20 people in this team. 10 of them are building this new feature, 5 of them are building that new feature, and 5 of them are basically running everything that exists, and here are the 6 processes that they're running. Now, why are you doing that? Because run work is important, and you need to account for it, and you have a team of people. So you need to, if someone wants to debate about, wants to sort of like influence, you should change these initiatives, you should add this initiative on there, you need to be clear about what the people are actually doing, right? Instead, what's the alternatives? So now if you have dependencies, and you might have a requesting team and a supporting team, right? This is just a simple way of thinking about dependencies. And clearly you can have more complex dependencies between teams and all that sort of stuff. If they're too complicated, you may have a topology problem, right? But ideally you've got not too complicated dependencies. Your requesting team wants to write down specifically the initiatives, the resources, and the risks. So we're saying here, initiative, launch feature C. And the area, I've just broken this down into areas just to make it clearer. Campaign and assets, pipeline and price, definition, delivery, and SAP code. Campaign and assets from marketing. I want pipeline and price from sales. Product is going to define the product. Engineering is going to deliver the product. And the SOP and support is going to make an SOP for supporting it. And that's what I think I need. Now, this is like a mini project plan. Clearly, there's more work that has to go into this, like obviously. But the point of this plan is not to do all the work, right? The point of this plan is to make sure that you've got people lined up. People are aligned, right? So we've got this plan, we're saying this, and we're saying here that we've got the risk here. We think marketing's fine. We've looked at sales' plan. Sales don't think they can do it, but there's some risk here. So we put it marked it yellow. Product said that they can define it. They've already defined it. It's all ready. They've done the discovery work, whatever it is. Engineering, well, what's happening in engineering here? Let's look at the supporting team here. So this will be engineering. Engineering needs to write down their initiatives, their non-plan, and their run work. Basically, the resources that they're doing. Here now, clearly, if they have dependencies, they'd also write down the resources and risks and so on as well. But here, you've got initiative, feature A, feature B. These are things we're doing. We have some resources on these. Now, you might, in this particular team here, we have 10 people, right? Now, all I'm doing with resources here for this is I'm just saying this takes 2 people, this takes 3 people. Maintenance, I have 1 person dedicated to maintenance, and I have 4 people doing this infrastructure project A. Now, somewhere else, I'll have records of what exactly these mean to make it clear enough to people. And I've got a prioritization here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've also said feature D is going to take 3 people and it's priority 5, so therefore we can't do it because we only have 10 people. And feature D, it's going to take 6 people and it's priority 6, so we can't do that either. So that's the non-plan work. Now what's happening here is now we're really clear about we can't launch feature C because engineering is not funded enough to deliver feature C, right? Or because their prioritization is not what it should be to deliver feature C. Maybe we need to have a debate about whether feature B should be priority 2 or feature C should be priority 2. Right? Maybe we need to switch these around. Maybe we can find a way of doing less work on infrastructure, but we can actually have a constructive discussion about this. And one thing that's interesting with this, by the way, is that not only is it's like, so by making this super clear, if you have a really bad environment, like if you have sort of a conflicty environment, then yeah, this will exacerbate that conflict. But the thing is that conflict is going to happen anyway. It doesn't matter what's going on in your business, so it doesn't matter what your environment is, that conflict's going to happen. So if you write a plan at the start and the plan is short enough to be clear on what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, right, then you can surface these things and you can make sure you have that conflict before it becomes a problem. Now, we talked about the dependencies and how to write the plan. That's particularly at the start really helpful, because at the start you're deciding what you're going to do and what you're actually not going to do and what your OKRs are. Some of this will come back to feed into the OKRs, and you have to say, well, we can't do that one even from the start. There's no point in doing this one. We don't have the resources. During the quarter, and even at the start, you're going through this process of let's get these up here. You're going through the process of write, review, revise, right? So we have this write, review, revise, and what we're doing with this is we're taking this plan, and this is why it must be a short plan, right? You do a 360-degree review. So reviewing it with your team, your peers, your stakeholders, your manager, anyone who's involved in this project, anyone who's a dependency, anyone who depends on you, your management, the people doing the work clearly need to be involved in this. And you're having discussion about it. You're having some collaboration between different groups of people on this. And you're asking these questions, why this choice? Why are we doing this? Trying to understand it. It's not always trying to win, trying to understand. And the act of understanding is what's going to help you come up with a better way. Right? Is there a better way to do this? Have you considered this idea? Have you considered this impact? Have you considered this risk? What about that dependency? Have you considered that other dependency? Do you need to add a dependency in here? Maybe you actually depend on engineering team B, and we need to actually get engineering team B to do something, but they're not doing that because they don't have the resources. So now we have a problem. And of course, all of this stuff comes up with some level of conflict, some level of problem that you have to solve. But that's okay, because that's all going to come up at some point in time during the quarter. And if you can bring it up in that planning process, wherever that is during the quarter, and what I mean by that is that, yes, you want to do the plan at the start of the quarter, right? Do a plan and you'll service a lot of these issues, right? But you're also reviewing the plan through the quarter as new things happen. We discovered partway through the quarter, we're updating this item here. We update this and discover that actually marketing can't deliver the assets because of some problems. So we have to mark that red. That's something we might discover halfway through the quarter, but if we can discover this early, this is helping us to change and adapt our plans going forward based on reality, right? Okay. All the way through this conversation, as you're doing this, you're using your OKRs as sort of North Stars. Like, we're all trying to achieve these things. And so that's a really helpful thing to think about as you're going through the write, review, revise cycle. Now, one of the things to think about when you're doing the plan is don't do all of the work. The plan is a plan, it's not the work. So you write a review and revise a plan, then you do the work. And you've got 3 months to do the work. If you're at the start of the quarter, you've got the whole 3 months. And keep repeating this through the quarter. So doing the work often involves resolving the issues raised in reviewing the plan. And through the quarter, as you're reviewing the plan repeatedly with your colleagues and your team, your peers, your stakeholders, whoever else it is, you'll discover new issues because things happen, right? So as you're going through that, those things happen, you can then trigger off more work. You're not going to, in that review meeting, solve all of those problems. The point is to say, oh, we've got a problem here. We have a red where we didn't expect to have a red. We have a dependency that's going to turn red. We have something that you thought you could do that turns out to be much harder. We have a different situation. Whatever it is, we have to change. What do we do? If we can resolve that in our half-hour meeting, we resolve it. If not, we set up another meeting and try to resolve it there, involving the right people in that meeting. Right? We don't need to do all of the work in that review process. Okay, now the secret to this, The secret about this is really that the planning habit, right, creates shared ownership. So as you're doing this plan, you're reviewing with people, those people are becoming part owners of that plan because they're influencing it. And what that means is that all those conflicts that happen are no longer conflicts between us versus you. It's now our problem to solve. We are now on the same side of the table, collaborating on a plan to solve the problem, or a set of plans to solve the problems. Right? It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be super smooth, but it will improve that process. And the reason for this is because those who write the plan don't find the plan, right? So if you can engage other people in helping you write the plan, that's a really wonderful tool. A Jedi Master's trick with this, by the way, is to make sure that when you write your plan, it's actually really short. Like it's 1 page, 2 pages, and you can. As you're having a short plan like that, people are more willing to address it. If you leave some weaknesses in the plan, you'll get their engagement. Now, even if that weakness is almost intentional, right? It's okay. Show them a draft. Tell them it's an early draft. Tell them, this is my first cut. What do you think? If they say something that's really obvious, there's no point in being upset about it. It's actually like, this is cool. This is great because now you're engaged in my plan, right? So none of this is about performance and saying, here's my plan, aren't I a genius? Admire my work and aren't I marvelous, right? It's about doing something that gets the engagement of those other people. There's a story, by the way, of a Australian from university. In fact, Duncan, who I think is still watching, may remember this story from CS 101 or whatever it was we did. It was for there's a game called Battle Chess. And it was a graphical game of chess, and it had like animated queens and kings and pieces. And so they had this manager who was always interfering in things. And this is a little bit different concept, but it's the same idea. He's always interfering in things, and they needed to sort of have him do his interference without damaging anything. So one of the designers made the queen moving around, and everywhere she went, she had this duck that was following her. But what they did is they made the duck separate from the queen. And he said he would always change something. So he looked at this and he said, I love everything about it, but I don't like the duck. Get rid of the duck. So the designer was like, okay, delete. Now I've got rid of the duck, and now you're happy. And this is just a tool to get the right engagement from that particular manager. And what you're doing is the same kinds of things here. You're trying to make sure that your plan is not just a tool for telling people what you're doing. It's a tool for getting engagement. If you see the plan like that, then having that short 1-page straw man plan that's designed to be torn apart, designed to get engagement, is actually a massive win. Okay, if you have any questions or comments on this, I'd love to hear it. Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear that at this stage. That's sort of the end of my presentation, my webinar on plans. As a reminder, what I do, I work with Scaleup, so I work with executive teams usually on seed to Series D. We can go through this process. We can understand how you're doing plans and what you need to do that's different. Or we can look at the whole broader process of goal setting, strategy setting, how you use OKRs, how you're collaborating and delegating and all that sort of stuff. And I will help you solve those problems, right? We can do this as a retrospective, execution audit, full rollout, custom solution. Book a call on meet.talktorichard.com if that's of interest to you. If you're an individual and you're interested, I'm currently in the process of setting this up. So I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a line on LinkedIn. Just contact me as a DM, whatever you need to do. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you about what you're needing here, but where I'm thinking this is going is a community with peer coaching and expert training and a cohort course. For some reason, I've read that from the bottom up. I think the point here is that community and the peer coaching is the thing that I think is most valuable here, of how you get, as leaders, input from other leaders and how you exercise your coaching ability with other peers. And so that's the thing that I think is really valuable here, but I also want to add in some of this kinds of training that I have and some other training from people as well. So that's the end of my presentation today. I'd love to hear from you if this is interesting to you. I'd love to hear from you as a chat, as a comment on LinkedIn. If you're on YouTube, feel free to drop a line on YouTube, whatever you like. But I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I've got a comment here. And from Duncan, yes, great to hear from you, Duncan. I will get back to you on that one. It's late here because he's in Australia. A lot of this is relevant to larger organizations like mine. I think it is relevant to larger organizations like yours. Yes, I do agree with this. And I also am happy to work with larger organizations. So very happy if someone is in a larger organization, feel free to reach out. A lot of this is pretty relevant. My specialization is in smaller organizations, simply because I don't love bureaucracy and overhead, but I think that it does work really well in larger organizations as well. All right, thanks very much for joining. If you found this useful, please do comment, like on it, subscribe, all of that usual sort of social media guff, but also share it with your colleagues. If you think this is useful, share it with your colleagues, because what happens in this, all of this kind of stuff, it's valuable for you to do, but it's super valuable when you and your colleagues are doing the same thing, right? So share it with your colleagues, see if it's useful. All right, thanks. Have a great day and scale well. Really appreciate your time.